Title: Threads of the Forgotten Map. Year: 283,333,333. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the twilight era of the southern clans, long before the river cities rose to dominance, the song without source first echoed across the whetstone canyons. It was not a melody sung by voices, but by the grinding bones of the land, a tune woven into soil, water, and grief. No one remembered who first hummed it aloud, but all remembered the warmth it stirred, ancient, aching, ancestral. The room keeper, a hunched man with cataract, clouded eyes and fingers, always stained in ochre, claimed it came from a time when unity ruled over fear. And now, with warlords devouring borderlands like hungry stars, that unity was but a myth until the whispers began again. People came to him in secret. They sought guidance, old maps, and meaning. I don't offer destinations, he told them, drawing lines through dirt. Only reminders that your soul already knows the way. Chapter 2. The tide of war threatened to swallow the lowlands, but the rune keeper refused to evacuate. Instead, he called upon the weavers, the dancers, the healers, the ignored powers of the village. You want protection? He asked the gathered few. Then protect what binds us. Among them was a young archivist named Alara, whose mother had died defending a village too proud to unite with its neighbors. Alara held silence like armor, but when she saw the rune keeper tracing forgotten glyphs across the skin of a war drum, something opened inside her. Together they sent encoded messages disguised as lullabies to distant tribes. Songs became maps, maps became meetings, meetings became alliances, and still the enemy came. But when the thunder of war reached their gates, they met it not with swords, but with unity. Every tribe arrived, not beneath a flag, but beneath a sky marked with symbols only the room keeper could recall. Chapter 3. They won, not by blood, but by standing in a line unbroken. Not one word was uttered during the final confrontation, not one scream. Only the song without source played, through wind, through memory, through every step taken by those who believed that the soul knew where they were going. It was only the mind that resisted the map. The rune keeper did not survive the aftermath. He had burned himself to ink. But in his absence, Alara sang. She sang maps for others to follow, and unity, once myth, became inheritant. Title: The Drowning Pact. Year: 282,692,307.4. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. They came to the village of Marath when the tides were wrong. The sea, once a servant of the moon's quiet breath, had begun to pulse with its own rhythm, erratic, hungering. Boats returned shredded or not at all. Fish died with open eyes, their scales etched with cryptic spirals. The villagers spoke in whispers, as if louder voices might wake what slumbered in the brine. Into this unease walked a man with salt in his lungs and a promise on his back. They called him the Oathbreaker. Years ago, he had led Marath's guardians into a failed alliance with the tide-marked, a coastal sect of zealots who believed surrendering to the ocean flow would usher divine unity. The ritual ended in screams and silence. He alone emerged. He had vanished after that, leaving only grief and eroded trust. Now he returned, not to lead, but to listen. The village, weary and grieving, allowed him only the hour most hot. They watched for signs of betrayal, of penance, of usefulness. He brought none, only stillness. And every night he walked to the shore where the water now foamed like a mouth trying to remember how to speak. It was there he met her, the last of their kind. She was not born of Marath, but came from a line sworn to guard its soul. Her eyes shimmered with memory. Her skin bore scars shaped like maps to sunken sanctuaries. She did not smile, but she did not turn away. "You've returned to drown?" he asked one twilight. "No," he said, "to remember why I lived." She offered no comfort, only a question. "Will you claim what you abandoned?" He said nothing, but the sea stirred, and far below, something old opened its eyes. Chapter 2. The tide bled black on the third day. A child disappeared into the surf. No cry, no struggle, just a handprint of foam left on the sand. The village panicked. Prayers once whispered returned in torrents. Offerings were thrown to the waves. Blame was easy. Eyes turned to the Oathbreaker. He did not defend himself. He walked into the square and knelt before the old stone idol, once a totem of protection, now a withered effigy of failure. "I will go into the deep," he said, "and if I once awake and still stirs, I will lull it to sleep." "No one returns from the deep," the elder said. "I did," he replied. The last of their kind stood beside him. "If he goes, I go." And so they descended, not by boat, but through the mouth of Mira, a cavern beneath the cliffs that led to the drowned catacombs of their ancestors. It was said the sea spoke clearer in that place. They walked in silence, guided only by flickering glyphs that pulsed when truth was near. In the third chamber, They found the altar. It pulsed like a second heart. Memories poured forth. The failed ritual, the chanting tide marked the ocean, rising not to accept their sacrifice, but to test their sincerity. The Oathbreaker remembered, fleeing not from fear, but from the horror of realizing he had believed in something false and led others to their doom. I lied to save them, he whispered, but it cost more than truth. The woman said. He nodded and wept into the salt. The pulse beneath the altar quieted. Responsibility, once named, becomes a tether. Chapter 3. They emerged not cleansed, but claimed. The villagers gathered around the shrine as the sea swelled unnaturally high. From its center rose a form amorphous, vast, eyes like black curls reflecting memory. It was not a monster. It was a question. What have you learned? The Oathbreaker stepped forward. I mistook surrender for wisdom. I led without listening. I returned not to command, but to serve. The last of their kind placed her hand on his shoulder, and I witnessed his vow. The sea shuddered. A wave surged toward the village, then stilled inches from the shore. You are not surviving. The current whispered. You are rehearsing resurrection. And then it receded. The villagers did not cheer. There were no songs, only silence, and the slow, sacred act of rebuilding trust. The Oathbreaker remained, not as leader, but as laborer. He mended nets. He buried the lost. He taught children the truth not of fear, but of responsibility. And in time, they renamed him, not hero, not priest, but kin. And in the village of Merath, where the tides now flowed in harmony with breath, collective security was no longer a wall. It was a circle, held by those who dared to claim what they had once denied. Title: The Shadow Pact. Here, 282,051,281.7. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. The outer colonies called her a traitor. The core worlds called her a ghost. To the weak, she was salvation. To the powerful, a rumor with knives. The Oathbreaker turned. Savior had once been an operative of the Hellion Directorate, sworn to protect planetary unity through manipulation, surveillance, and selective silence. Then she saw what the Unity Protocol did to fringe settlements. Wiped their languages, severed their tin lines, labeled their resistance as malfunction. She walked away from her oath and disappeared into the forgotten rings of Lunar Bastion 9, where the weak waited for a weapon that remembered them. Chapter 2. The stranger with your eyes came to find her. Not a spy, not a soldier, a refugee from a satellite orphanage, raised on myths of her former glory. You protected my mother once, the stranger said. She died believing you'd return. The Oathbreaker lit a pulse blade. And now I need you to make them remember her. Together, they infiltrated the Black 4 of the hollowed asteroid used by Hellion to preempt rebellion by scripting it first. The scripts were real, the revolutions rehearsed. Every act of defiance had been written before it was born. Until now. Chapter 3. They rewrote the broadcast, not with victory speeches, but with testimony. Grainy footage of starved children, banned lullabies, the whisper of native prayers. The weak did not rally in rage. They rose in recognition. The Directorate sent fleets, but each pilot found their navigation jammed with a single line of code. To live fully, you must taste both egg and ecstasy. The phrase couldn't be purged. It was etched into every navigation star, every suit O2D, every silent thought that had once been surveilled. The stranger looked up from the rebel ship's helm. Did we win? No, the Oathbreaker said. We made it so they can, because defending the weak does not weaken the strong. It remembers what strength was meant to be, and builds a future no tyranny can script. Title: The Surrendered Hearth. Year: 281,410,256.2. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. There was a time when fire was not shared by hoarded tended in secret caverns, whispered over like sacred sin. The village of Threnel still bore the scars of that age. Burnt doorways, scorched fields, and elders, too afraid to teach forgiveness. But things began to change the day the flame prophet arrived. She came barefoot and cloaked in woven ash, her voice a trembling thread stitched with windsong. At her side walked a figure half forgotten by name, called only the whisper of shame. No one knew if it was a man or woman, only that they wore a veil made from 100 vows unspoken. They did not speak. They listened, and somehow, in the listening, the unspoken found breath. The prophet's fire was strange, not red, not gold, but shifting colors that matched the emotions of the watchers. To the fearful it burned blue, to the hopeful green, to the guilty violet. She kindled it in the village square and spoke not of doctrine, but of warmth. Deference is not a danger, she said, but a doorway. The elders watched in silence. The children came first, curious. Then to shun those too strange or quiet or loud for Threnn old ways. And then came the firekeepers, reluctantly, their own hearths growing colder by comparison. They asked, "What do you want?" The prophet did not answer. The whisper of shame approached them instead, lifting the veil just enough for their eyes to meet. And in that mirror of vulnerability, the firekeepers saw themselves not as masters, but as fearful stewards of something meant to be shared. That night, a single child offered their ohammer to the prophet's flame. It turned silver, and Threnel exhaled. Chapter 2. For the first time in 2 generations, Threnel built a common hearth. It was not placed in the temple or beside the governing hall. It stood at the crossroad between the fields, the forge, and the homes. There, each person brought something: wood, herbs, stones etched with personal stories. The prophet accepted each without judgment. The whisper said nothing, but stood by those whose hands trembled the most. Trouble came, as it always does, with banners and boots. A delegation from Northel, a neighboring village renowned for its isolationist traditions, arrived bearing accusations. "You endanger our borders," their leader said. "Your mixing of ways will weaken what makes us strong." The villagers hesitated. The prophet stepped aside. A young woman, once mocked for her way of speaking, stepped forward. "We are stronger now," she said. "Not because we are the same, but because we are seen." Another voice joined, then another, and the whisper of shame removed their veil. Beneath it was not a monster, nor a hero, but a face etched with every insult, every exile, every glance turned away in judgment, a mosaic of humanity, a mirror. The delegation left in silence. And that night, the fire burned brighter than it ever had before. The prophet turned to the whisper and whispered, "A fresh beginning is always one surrender away." Chapter 3. Seasons passed. The common hearth became more than symbol. It was school, council, sanctuary. Disputes were settled by sitting near it, because fire, it seemed, unveiled the truth behind words. The prophet aged, though her fire never dimmed. The whisper of shame began to speak, not often, but always when it mattered. One day, a group of strangers arrived. They bore relics of forgotten tribes, wore guard from lands untouched by Threnel's maps. Some limped, some danced. All were different. "And we stay?" one asked. The village paused. Once, such a request would have led to quiet refusals and whispered fears. But now, the fire greeted the strangers with a warm green glow, and the youngest of Threnel offered them stones marked with welcome. Years later, when the prophet was long returned to ash and memory, a new child was born with fire dancing in their veins. They asked who the whisper of shame was. Their mother smiled. Once they were the outsider we feared. Now they are the ancestor we remember. And the fire burned on alive with every difference, surrendered not as defeat, but as gift. The community grew not by conquest, but by kindling. And so the world turned softer and stronger. Title: The Thread Spiller's Bargain. Year: 280,769,230.4. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The scarred envoy rode through the molten canyons of Calathar on a wind-laced mount born of woven storms and engineered flesh. Each hoofstep bled blue light across the desert, 4 remnants of forgotten tech fusing with raw elemental magic. Great had carved the world he now traversed. Cities once glittered in obsidian towers, but those who ruled them mined the pulse of the planet until the seams tore and reality cracked. Now only whispers remained in the wind, and a single envoy, cast out and cursed, journeyed to find the one called the Thread Spiller. She alone remembered the beginning. She alone had stitched prophecy with sacrifice, and she alone held the last map to salvation. Chapter 2. He found her deep in the basalt halls of the ruined loom, her fingers bleeding over threads of ether woven between bone, thin spires. "You seek to undo what your kind bled dry," she said without looking. "I seek to offer truth in place of coin." She turned. Her eyes were milky with memory, sharp with recognition, then bleed as the land bled. Only sacrifice buys redemption. He stepped forward, dropping a vial. Within it his lineage, encoded and condemned, a bloodline that had ruled the Pulse Harvesters, a name that triggered revolts, history buried beneath titles. "You offer this freely?" she asked. "I'd offered everything." And so she pulled a single strand from her loom and pierced it through his skin. He screamed. Truth was never painless. Chapter 3. The thread rewove his soul. He sought all his ancestors' bargains. The cities drowned for crystal, the forests raved for essence, and in return he became a conduit. The loom responded. Across Calathar, a crest cracked, not in violence, but in rebirth. Spring surged. Sky barges were routed to deliver food, not weapons. Vaulted halls to solve, releasing hoarded magic to the common folk. But the cost. The scarred envoy forgot his name. He became message, not messenger. And the Thread Spiller smiled, tears running down her face. "Hardship and sacrifice are the twin midwives of truth," she said, releasing the final stitch. The loom quieted. A new age had begun, not of gold, but of balance. Title: The Gravity of Kindness. Year 280,128,204.9. Era Primordial Pulse. Author Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. It began with a trail of wounded birds. Small, bright, feathered things left at doorsteps and windowsills across the village of Orales. They arrived not in pain, but in need, wings bent, eyes wide, hearts still beating with trust. No one saw who brought them. No one claimed the act, but every bird was placed precisely, deliberately at the thresholds of those who needed healing most. Some called it coincidence. Others called it omen. Only the stranger at the threshold knew the truth. He had no name in Orales, just the cloak he wore, frayed at the edges and stitched with symbols no one recognized. Children said he whispered to foxes. Elders say he slept beneath the roots of the dreaming trees. He never entered a home, but he was always seen just before a kindness was remembered. He had once been a soldier, the village guest, or a fallen priest, or maybe something stranger, a herald from a world not bound by power or conquest, but by reverence. He found the girl at the well. She was feeding a dog with 3 legs, her hand trembling but her eyes soft. The dog wagged its tail, as if to say, "I remember this." The stranger watched. "You care," he said quietly. The girl looked up. They said he was useless. Then they forgot the purpose of care. From his pouch, he withdrew a stone shaped like a feather and handed it to her. "Carry this," he said. "It weighs nothing, until it's time." She took it, and far above, the star blinked once, then held. Chapter 2. Words spread slowly. The stone did nothing, the villagers said. Yet those who carried them began to notice changes. Animals once wary approached with trust. Tempers cooled near fires. Disagreements ended in shared bread. They were small shifts, but real. One boy, known for tormenting cats, was found sobbing beside a fox cub with a broken paw. "They trusted me," he whispered, "and I was gentle." The stranger passed through that night. He said nothing, but beside the boy, he left a feather wrapped in silk. The girl with the 3-legged dog became something of a steward. She took in the injured, cast out. Her home, once silent with grief, became a sanctuary of fur and feather. The elders warned of imbalance. Too much care weakens a people, they argued. Survival requires focus. But the girl shook her head. Compassion is focus. It teaches us to see beyond ourselves. The stranger stood behind her that day, silent but known. The village listened, not because they were convinced, but because they remembered the birds and how each had survived. Then, on a night without wind, the herald of celestial rebellion arrived. She wore armor made of moonlight and walked beside a stag crowned in ash. "The stars have judged this village," she declared, and found it tilted toward mercy. The elders panicked. "What judgment is this?" The herald pointed to the animals resting among them. "Have they not taught you loyalty, surrender, joy, and simplicity? They are not lesser. They are elder." The stranger stepped forward. "She speaks true," he said. "You are not behind." He turned to the girl. "You are a gathering mythic mass for a gravity no system can resist." And the stars nodded. Chapter 3. The herald stayed for 13 days. She taught the children to sing without words. She taught the dogs to dance in circles that mirrored constellations. She did not argue with the elders. She showed them what the animals had shown her, that love, when practiced without expectation, changes the weight of the world. The villagers began to share stories once hidden of times they had been comforted by a stray paw, a nuzzle, a creature's quiet companionship. They began to see those memories not as silly, but sacred. Orales changed. There were still crops to plant, wounds to mend, storms to endure. There is also more laughter, more stillness, more watching the sky not for threats, but for wonder. The girl grew older. The 3-legged dog became a legend. He slept near dying villagers and woke only when they passed in peace. And one night, the stranger vanished. At every doorstep, he left a feather. The stones he had once given now pulsed with warmth, not magic, but memory. The villagers built a sanctuary of stillness near the well, not for worship, for listening. They called it the threshold, and in time, other villages came, curious, skeptical, needing something they could not name. They were not given answers. They were given animals, and in that silent trust, they remembered what it meant to care for what cannot repay you. Orales did not become a kingdom. It became a hearth, and from that hearth, the myth of kindness spread not like fire, but like gravity. And the scene, undeniable. Title, The Echo Beneath the Throne. Year, 279,487,179.1. Era, Primordial Pulse. Author, Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The banished princess lived in the shadow of her own legend. Her name was never spoken inside the alabaster walls of the House of Helen, only referred to in hushes as the one who fled. At 12, she had cracked under the pressure of inheriting a seed laced in expectation and wrapped in ancestral failure. Now, in a mountain village far from royal halls, she passed her days tending to these and reading stories to children whose parents had long stopped telling them fairy tales. They called her Aunt Laura. They didn't know her crown once burned hotter than the sun, but sometimes she'd sit by the stream, hearing echoes no one else could have voiced, smaller than hers, crying not from pain but from longing. Chapter 2. She met the inner child's echo one dusk when the mist lay low, and the stream sang strange. It sat across the water, its face a child's, but its eyes ageless. "Why did you leave?" it asked. "Because I was afraid I would fail." The echo did not blink. "And did you?" "I never tried." Silence swelled between them like a third presence. Birds dared not chirp. Even the beasts paused in their lay, power dances. "You left a wound that now festers in more than yourself," the echo whispered. She closed her eyes. "I don't know how to fix it." "Then begin with what you can reach." Chapter 3. The next morning, she packed honey jars, herbs, and books. She returned to the outer villages of Holland first not as a princess, but a healer, a teacher, a listener. Years passed. Rumors grew of a woman with a familiar voice, whose presence mended more than bones. Some claimed the royal crest appeared behind her, when she sang lullabies. Eventually, the house of Helen opened its doors again, not to welcome back a prodigal heir, but to receive a woman who had taught the land to breathe. The wound that runs silent may leave the loudest trail toward healing. She told them when asked why she returned, and in that silence, the throne learned how to listen. Title: The Crown That Burns. Year: 178,153. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the old kingdom of Saravan, ambition was weighed in blood and ash. There, the ruler who burned brightest was King Rathon, a man whose gaze could fracture resolve. He was known as the Laughing Ember not for joy, but for how his victories crackled through the bones of those who opposed him. He had once been a healer, a son of earth and herb, until the thirst to be remembered overtook the vow to do no harm. His palace grew from the remains of the infirmary he destroyed with his own hand. All who knelt to him bore a scar. All who defied him bore none. Chapter 2. But in the south, where stirred of the shattered healer, they said she once stood at Rathon's side, that she had loved him not as king, but as the man who whispered to sprigs of lavender and murmured peace to fevered children. She returned now not for revenge, but for reckoning. Through villages choked by ash and fear, she walked barefoot, planting seeds where he had silted soil. She did not preach. She simply healed, and in healing unmade the crown's dominion. Soon, Saravan's people began to remember, not just who she was, but who he had been. Chapter 3. The day came when Rathon met her in the temple of broken oaks. He offered no blade. She offered no forgiveness. Only silence. She placed a mirror before him, one she had carried since his first betrayal. It bore no magic, only truth. He stared into it, and wept, not for who he saw, but for how far he had run from the hands that once healed. And then quietly he knelt. He laid down the crown. She did not pick it up. They burned it together. From its ashes grew a vine twisting, wild and alive. Saravan would have no king that day, only a garden, and from it stories that would never burn again. Title: The Shattered Archive. Year: 278,205,127.8. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. The child of the void knew nothing of peace. Born beneath a broken comet and raised in the ruins of the old accord, they had wandered from one forgotten temple to the next, seeking clues to a past the world had buried beneath centuries of dust and denial. What they found instead were fragments, half-burned scrolls, cracked murals, echoes, and always the same symbol, a figure with ball-threaded hair, wielding a crown made from vertebrae, a lone Greek bride. Legend said she had once ended a war by snapping her own spine and offering it as a bridge between the two sides. But no one believed in such things and more. No one but the child. Chapter 2. In the sunken library of Dalok, they discovered her final act. It was not sacrifice, it was warning. A ritual etched in blood. The past ignored becomes the future repeated. With that, the child made their way east, to the new cities thriving on the old ruins. The rulers had polished history until it gleamed false. They taught of triumphs without pain, empires without oppression. So the child performed the ritual, not with violence, with memory. They summoned the truth. Old spirits rose. Visions came. Citizens saw the truth of their foundation. Towers built on bones. Rivers fed with still tears. At first, chaos, then questions, and then change. Chapter 3. The bone break bride appeared only once in dream to the child. "You carried what I could not," she whispered. "You broke no bones, but you stitched together the truth." The child awoke with a mark on their back, a spine-shaped scar that glowed in moonlight. They never claimed credit. They only left archives where the lies had stood. Each city they visited fell into a season of silence, and then rebirth. "You'll find no freedom in control," the child often wrote on walls. "Only reminders that you were never meant to hold it." And slowly the world began to loosen its grip and breathe. Title: The Grove Beneath the Ash. Year: 277,564,102. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The winds of Harnemer were no longer gentle. What once danced through leaves now scraped over barren stone, carrying the scent of old fire and forgotten rain. The forest that had once cloaked the veil of whispers had withered to memory, preserved only in the songs of those old enough to mourn it. At the heart of the veil, hidden beneath a canopy of illusion and smoke, stood the last of the green. A grove tended by one who spoke more with birds than men. They called her the boundless listener. She had no throne, no title, only roots she guarded and voices only she could hear. Chapter 2. Few dared the path to her grove. Fewer still returned unchanged. The listener kept no scrolls, but she remembered every scar carved by flame, every branch severed for gold or glory. When children came, frightened by tales of the world outside, she showed them how to listen first to the wind, then to the roots, and finally to themselves. One child, male, came not for safety, but with vengeance in his veins. His village drowned beneath a blackened river poisoned from a mine the kings had dug too deep. He came with torch in hand, swearing justice, but the listener did not stop him. She offered him silence. In silence he heard the grove breathe. In silence he wept, and in his tears the earth stirred. Chapter 3. Years passed. The kings fell, one by one, not to war, but to rot from within. Their gold turned brittle. Their courts grew quiet. Meanwhile, the grove grew. Male became its guardian, his torch long extinguished. He carried stories now, not fire. Stories of a world once lost, and of one still possible. The shadow whisperer, once a title given in fear, became his name. He taught others as the listener once taught him, to hear the plea of a dying stream, to soothe the ache of soil with song, to remember that inheritance is not gold but green. When the veil of illusion finally fell, the grove remained not hidden but waiting, and from it the world was replanted. Title: Beneath the Quiet Tremor. Year: 276,923,076.5. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In a village carved from salt and silence, nestled between the rids of a long-dead beast, lived a girl known only as the Echo Sister. She was not named for the past, she repeated, but for the way her voice stirred truth from the bones of the earth. People came to her with wounds not of flesh, but of soul losses too old to cry over, injustices too quiet to shout down. She did not speak much. She listened, and that alone unraveled generations of pain. Beneath her house the bones of the bone mender pulse, not alive, not dead, remembered. Chapter 2. One day, a man came from the southern trade cities, bearing law on his shoulders and conquest in his eyes. He said the village owed taxes for peace, but peace had not been offered, only the illusion of it. The Echo Sister met him not with rebellion, but invitation. She brewed tea with the leaves of remembrance. She sang lullabies older than written speech, and slowly he began to weep not for her, but for himself. He saw the child he had once been, taught to conquer because no one taught him to connect. And so he stayed, to unlearn, to mend. Chapter 3. Under her guidance, the village opened its arms to more than refugees. They welcomed the wounded ideas of those sent to break them. They cradled them with compassion, not to condone, but to convert. By love, not force. The Echo Sister whispered each night to the earth, "Let the sacred rise again." And it did. From soil and sorrow, new rituals blossomed. Shared meals, shared stories, shared silence. The man from the south died, an old friend, on his grave. The sacred lies buried beneath tremors older than memory, waiting for eyes that dared to awaken. And beside it, the Echo Sister planted a tree whose roots reached bone, and from bone, justice flowered. Title: The Mirror That Refused to Shatter. Year: 276,282,051. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. Beneath the ancient moonlight, the village of Naren kept its secrets like seeds under frost. At its edge, where the forest loomed like a silent congregation, the girl named Sierra watched shadows lengthen. She was not from Naren, though none could remember when she arrived, only that the storms had grown fiercer since. She bore no family name, only the chill that crept in when she passed. The children whispered her nickname, Stranger with Your Eyes. They said she could mimic anyone's face in dreams, but Sarah dreamed of mirrors, and in every one she saw a woman, not herself, but wearing her sadness. Chapter 2. The dreams worsened as the festival approached, a celebration of the moon's silver reign. Naren's elders insisted on tradition. Offerings, dances, silence with the departed, but Sarah saw the cracks in their smiles. She saw the bruises hidden beneath sleeves, the hunger in the eyes of children, and always the mirrors, hidden in closets, covered in barns, buried under floorboards. One night she followed her dream to the grove of still water, a mirror born of nature. She stared into it until her reflection blinked without her. You are what they forgot, it whispered. Chapter 3. Bruce peeled back like bark from a long dead tree. Aaron had not always been silent. Once they had voices. Once they had choices. But they had traded memory for safety, offered their grief to a soul mirror crafted in desperation after war. The mirror took their sorrow, and with it their courage. Sarah was born of that pact. A fragment made flesh, the vessel for what was cast off. But fragments remember. She returned to the village with the mirror in hand, no longer afraid of what stared back. She held it aloft during the festival, and for the first time in 100 years the people wept. They saw what they'd forgotten. They saw themselves. And the stranger with your eyes shattered the mirror, not to destroy it, but to set them free. Title: The Memoryless Wanderer. Year: 275,006. 141,025.2. Year: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. They called him the Memoryless Wanderer, not because he lacked a past, but because he chose to carry none of it with him. He walked barefoot across lands, scorched by knowledge, insulted by sorrow, where wisdom had been turned into a weapon and empathy deemed a flaw. Everywhere he went, libraries lay in ruin, their pages soaked in ash and arrogance. He did not mourn them. He did not fear them. He only whispered, what was learned without heart must be relearned through pain. And so he walked, carrying a single scroll he refused to read. Chapter 2. One day, the wanderer arrived at a citadel carved into the cliffs of the hollow coast. There, the keepers of truth studied the world's ancient secrets, unmoved by pleas from the starving villages below. Their tower rose higher than the cries of those in need. The wanderer did not challenge them with debate. He sat quietly in their hall for 9 days, unmoving, unblinking. On the 10th, a keeper asked, what do you seek? He said, only your ears. And then he spoke of a child who had burned her hands trying to warm her family with soul and knowledge. Only silence followed. Chapter 3. Shamed and stirred, a young keeper followed the wanderer down the mountain. She listened as he showed her broken people who had been left behind by thoughtless progress. She cried, and learned, and taught, and through her the keepers changed not all, but enough. They opened the vaults of truth, not to elevate themselves, but to uplift the forgotten. The wanderer never returned. Some say he walked into the sea. Others say he became the wind. But all agree that on the walls of the citadel now hangs the scroll unopened. This inscription reads, letting go is the bravest form of holding on. And below, the echo of the divine speaks in every act of kindness born from wisdom's embrace.